Hi everyone, thanks for joining today's webinar, What's New in BlackLight 2019 R2. My name is Ashley Hernandez and I'm the Director of Product Management here at BlackBag. Before we start today, there are a few notes we'd like to review. We're recording this webinar and we'll share an on-demand version when the webinar is complete. If you have questions, please submit them in the questions window and we will answer them throughout and in our Q&A at the end of the webinar. I'm joined today by our Vice President of Product Development, Drew Fahey. Drew leads our development team in creating comprehensive software solutions customers can trust. Drew has spent over 20 years conducting incident response and forensic investigations. His law enforcement and international experience stems from working with a broad cross-section of Fortune 500 corporations and government agencies around the world. Thanks for joining us, Drew. And thanks everyone else for joining today. And with that, let's get started. Today we're going to cover the highlights of new features in BlackLight 2019 R2. So we've had several features that we released early in the year that we've updated, and we're going to cover some of those in the beginning. So we're going to talk about how smart indexing has improved and what additional capabilities you have with it. We're also going to talk about some new integrations that we have. We want to make sure that BlackLight works with the full forensic suite of tools that you use, from image processing to grabbing additional Apple artifacts to working with vehicle forensic data. And so we'll talk a bit more about how those integrations will work. And then we're going to cover some improvements to our threat categories, what our new categories are with our partnership with Image Analyzer. And the last thing we're going to cover is some user requested enhancements. We continue to make BlackLight better with the improvements that you guys have provided and suggestions for new features. So we want to cover that towards the end. So let's dive in. We'll get started with the features. The first feature that I want to talk about is our smart indexing. Smart indexing is the process of extracting all the words from files in one pass, so you can locate artifacts with those words as needed. This is different than traditional content or keyword searching, where you need to enter in all the terms you are looking for up front, and then it only scans for those characters or patterns. With index searching, you can actually create all the words at the beginning and then search for any words you want once the index is created. In BlackLight, our smart indexing makes sure to only index files where the word extraction is the best method for searching. So in our first release, we really focused on documents and things that would be on the file system. And in our latest release, we've expanded indexing to gather words from things like emails, messages, and internet history, places where we've extracted additional content from those. And so then you can then search those for relevant terms as well, right alongside documents. You can choose to index your case at any point, so it's part of processing options, and we'll now include these new categories when we're doing indexing. In addition, if at some point you find a term when you're doing your index searching that you want to scan more comprehensively, including looking in an allocated, you can still combine it with content searching. So after you've done your index and you've looked to see if this is a relevant device, we still have the traditional keyword search method available for unallocated. Finally, Drew's going to talk to us about our new options for narrowing down to look at specific fields so that we can make sure that we've got things like the to and from field in the subject or looking for specific terms in the URL. The next piece that we have to talk about, and we're going to demo these in just 1 second, is the archive processing. So archives are file types or container types that have additional files in them like zip, gzip, or 7-zip. And so now you have two ways of expanding those within BlackLight. You've got the ability to do edit processing, which will do all of the files on the file system. And then you have the choice, if you don't want to do that, maybe you know that you just want to focus on a specific user directory, you can just choose to expand those particular archives. Once you expand archives, any processing you've already set up to run will run on the archives themselves. So we talked about the indexing. If you've expanded archives, you'll now be able to get the index results inside of all those archive types as well. And we're going to make sure that we expand 2 levels deep. So if you have a zip file contained in another zip file, or even a 7-zip file inside of a gzip file, we're going to go ahead and extract it 2 levels deep automatically through the automatic processing. And that's so that we don't run into issues where there's like a zip bomb. But you can definitely manually expand more of them if you'd like to go further into the structure. The last note before we get to the demo is just that zip processing or archive processing does actually cache those files to disk so that we can quickly search them and filter for them and have all that content available easily for us to report on. So with that, Drew, let's go ahead and get into the demo.
Thanks, Ashley. Hello, everyone. I'm going to bring over BlackLight to show you all those great features Ashley just talked about. Make this bigger so everyone can see it. All right, so for those of you who've been using BlackLight 2019 R1, this view will not be new to you. Those who are new to 2019 R1 or now 2019 R2 will notice we now have a new way to create the index searches. So you basically click on the add button, you'll create your new search. These indexes are saved for you, so you can create multiple different types of index searches. You're not limited to just one. And so what I've done here is we have, our typical case we use in our training scenarios with our Bennett image, and you can see here in the component pane, I have processed pretty much everything, and I have 2 partitions that I have chosen to basically do my index search on. I've chosen this racer partition and this bootcamp partition. And here what I've done is I've created a new index search, and I've just called it Josh_Bobby. And you can see I typed in the word Bobby, and I'm getting suggested terms here. I ran this query, obviously very simple query, just a single string query for the name Bobby, and I'm getting all my file hits back, which you would have seen in 2019 R1. But however, as Ashley said, we've expanded that to what we refer to as all of our normalized views. So that would be all of these data views that you have in BlackLight. So that's going to be communications, the media, locations, internet data, productivity, system logs, things like that. And as we start scrolling through these hits, you'll start seeing that I have a hit here that's in contacts. Keep going, I have email hits, I have internet history hits, there's hits within messages. And so I can look at any one of these. So as an example, I'll just click on the email hit here. And you'll see that here within this particular hit, there's context which shows me what exactly is being hit on. So in this case, we're getting a hit on the subject in this particular email of Bobby. And so you can actually see that there, and it's highlighted for you. We have the ability to tag from 2 different locations. You can tag from this view, which would tag it just as if you were in the email view itself. So you would actually get the email in the tag, which would then go into your report. Or if you wanted to tag the context of which that hit happened, which in this case would be the subject here, you could tag it within this middle pane view, and that will give you the context hit. And I'll show that in a minute. But so as you can see, anywhere we have these normalized is where the indexes have been created. And you have the option to do that upon initial evidence ingestion into BlackLight. If you don't do that because, from a speed standpoint, you just want to get to the data as quickly as possible, so you haven't chosen any of your options, you can always come back to your evidence status view, and you'll see that we have a couple of new options here. Obviously, the one is the indexing one. In this case, I've run indexing on the bootcamp partition, and I've run it also on the racer partition. You'll also notice, and I'm going to kind of correlate both of these back and forth, as we have an archives column. And again, on ingestion, you have the option to run your archiving, which basically means it's going to take certain archive types. Right now, we specifically are focused on a couple of common types. That's going to be zips, 7-zips, gzips, DMGs, tar files, things of more common in nature. And when you choose archives within the status view or evidence ingestion, that is going to extract all of those file types I just mentioned out to temporary locations, go through them and parse them. And if you've already chosen to run indexing, we'll rerun indexing on those unarchived items and it will make it available to you so you can then see it within the browser view or any of these other views where those data types may be applicable. So in essence, what that means is from an archive standpoint within the browser view, it'll be hierarchical. I'll show that in a second as well, and you'll be able to click through that. But more importantly, because we have the ability to do these smart indexes now through indexing, is I'll have that immediately available within your index view. So if I just go back and I'll show this as a real world practical example. If I go to my index search and I happen to be investigating Bobby and Josh are two guys who are involved in this car theft ring, and they do a lot of nefarious things with stealing cars and whatnot. So I'm investigating this, and I know Bobby's my subject, so I'm going to be looking for Bobby. So as I'm typing in Bobby, you can see my suggested terms list obviously updates. I go through, and as I'm going to my email, I notice, hey, there's Bobby Rodriguez. Okay, maybe I didn't know his last name, I just knew him as Bobby. Now I have a potential or a possible name of Bobby Rodriguez, which could be another subject that I'm looking for. And you notice in my suggested terms, I have some examples here. So I have Bobby R. Well, that's interesting. Bobby R, Bobby Rodriguez. I can correlate those two possibly. So if I click on Bobby R, it will switch to here. Let me just run this query. And you'll notice I have a couple of file hits. But I also have this link file hit, which is interesting. So if I click on this, why is that interesting? As I go down through it, as you know, in Windows investigations, link files can actually show me files that have been downloaded, amongst other things. I'm going to go through this and see the context of which this Bobby R is appropriate. And you'll notice, and I'll just bring this up so you can see it a little bit better. In here in this link file, it looks like there's a zip file called bobbyr.zip. Okay, maybe I saw that just through browsing because it's not deleted, it's not hidden or anything, it's there in plain sight, but obviously the index picked it up very quickly. And so now I can actually go to this particular location in one of different ways. I can double click this, it will take me to that actual link file, it won't take me to this. But if I wanted to see the link file, I could double click it and it would take me there. I'll show you that with an email as an example. But in this case, I'm actually going to file filter now because I'm curious about this zip file. So I'm going to go down and I'm going to choose I'm going to choose my archives for zips. I can even isolate it to just the racer partition or to the bootcamp partition. Just to make it simplified, we'll just do that and say zip. So I can even say, give me a path that includes or contains Josh, just to even further narrow that down. So we'll filter that. I should get a couple of hits here, and there's our Bobby R zip file. So as you see within the strings view, it'll automatically extract some of that data that's in the zip or the hex view. But if I wanted to see this in the actual, say, the browser view, I wanted to see where it was in line with everything else, I could reveal it and go to reveal in file browser. It's going to take me to the BlackLight file browser and show me where it is. Now, you notice I didn't process archives. I haven't processed this individual one, so it's not available. I just see the raw zip. So had you processed archives on initial ingestion or through the evidence status window to process them later on, you would see what you're about to see now. So in this case, I hadn't, so I'm going to go ahead and expand this individual file. It's going to do its magic behind the scenes, and it's going to expand Bobby for me here, hopefully. And as it does that, I don't think I clicked it right. As it does that, you'll notice, I actually double clicked it. Sorry, my mouse is a little goofy today. It gives me this hierarchical menu, which will then expand. I'm expanding a whole bunch of things at the moment, which is probably not a good thing for the demo, but that is what it is when you do a live demo. It will give me a hierarchical view here, and it will extract the files that are in that, and I'll be able to see it. So here's the Bobby R text file. You can then see the strings view, which you'd already seen prior to being extracted, but you have all of these information. So you can see, hey, these are potential cars that they might be looking for. And so all of that came through the index, and I was able to do that. When I extracted this, what happened behind the scenes is you'll notice evidence status here, and you see this pie chart, and it's because I clicked it a couple of times. I got overzealous in my clicking, but what it's doing is because I already run the index and I then expanded that one particular archive, it is now basically rerunning the index on that file. So that way that zip file now becomes indexed. So when I go back to my index search, as soon as it's done updating, and again, just so we're clear on this, when it reruns the index, it's just updating the index. It's not deleting the index and restarting, where in my case, it's doing a bunch of things because, like I said, I was a little overzealous in what I did. But what it will do is it will update your index and just add on to it. So that way, when you're parsing and you're coming back to this, you'll be able to then see, if you type in Mercedes as an example, you will see it within that text file that got extracted. So some of the other things that Ashley asked about or mentioned, and we'll show off here real quick, is we have the ability now to insert different options. So depending on what you have chosen here in your component view. So in this case, I've indexed Racer, I've indexed Bootcamp, and it's re-indexing the whole thing because I chose to restart it, which is what that dialog box was. You'll notice that the index is only will check what you have selected in your component pane. So if I've checked both of these and I want to do an insert, you'll notice that we have a lot of different types now. So I can isolate my searches, which is one of the reasons there's two reasons we call it smart indexing. One is because we can isolate things much quicker based on these particular types of our normalized data, and that the fact that we're only indexing certain things. We're not indexing everything. So example, we are not indexing unallocated space. We don't index files that we can't actually do something with. So for a perfect example, if you have an encrypted or even password protected archive, there's no point in us trying to index that until you can actually get into that particular file. So we kind of ignore those and leave that up to the investigator to figure out how they're going to get into that particular file, bring it back in, and then index it. So one of the things you'll see is we have this type option. So depending on what you have indexed, you'll notice we have our files, which came from 2019 R1, but then also all of the other areas. So example, email. So if I wanted to isolate just email, say just show me all of the things that we have indexed that's been email, and I know there's no email in my Bootcamp image, so while that's going, I'm just gonna turn it off. And I say, give me all of the email here, and we'll just run that query. So you're gonna see, here's all of the email that we've indexed on this particular system. Now that's great, but you still have here, 1,124 hits. You might want to narrow that down even more. So you can simply add more logic to this by saying and. If you're not sure how you want to type that, you can add logic here, and you can insert more types, or you can isolate it by a specific date range if you wanted to do that. So there's a lot of ways that you can make indexing pretty powerful, and you saw it's relatively quick. Obviously, the more data you have in your case, it's going to take a little bit longer to get some of those displays, but it is relatively fast. And so when you want to get to it, you find what you have, and then you can further isolate it. So for example, if you found something and the index wasn't quite getting you everything you wanted, then you could switch over to our traditional content search, add on that, and go from there. One of the things I told you is I'd show you later. So for example, in this particular email, if we wanted to actually go to this email within the email view, we could double click it, and that's kind of how you're gonna have to do it from here. Is you go into here, you double click on the, and I don't know, one of these views always funny. It will take you into the view. You can trust me on that. I don't know why it's not doing it now, but that's the nature of these demos. But when you double click any of those areas, it will take you into that particular view. So for example, if this was working at the moment, I could double click into there. So there we go. I think I'm gonna have to look into my mouse, but it will take you to that actual email. So from your index view right into this view. Now I told you if you wanted to tag those from the index view, you could easily do that. So it would be no different. So if I tagged this particular email from here, so tag email as a new tag, you'll notice we will create, we'll just call this tag 1. I'm going to create it, and tag 1 will be created for this particular email. You have obviously the choices. We'll just choose them all. It's fine. And in this tag email is now your email. Pretty simple. If you were to go to the report view, you would see this email here. So the same thing is going to apply if you are in your index view and you are looking, oh, that's the wrong index view. We want this email one, and I wanted to tag these particular emails. I can't do that query. That is a bad query. You can't just do and without anything. You'll notice that there is our email. It's tagged. So this is the same email we tagged from the email view. So if you were to tag it from here, so I'll just tag this particular Groupon one and tag this. I don't want to tag the search hit. I can tag this particular hit here as tag 1, or I can tag this context. Let's get a better one with better context. There's not a whole lot of these emails. All right, we'll just do this. You guys get the idea. So basically, there's the different ones. So it will tag it as email, it will tag it as an index search hit, or whatever you want to tag it as. And that's pretty much it from indexing. And again, it applies to all of our normalized views. It will also be applicable for, again, for the archive stuff. Once you have your archives, it will automatically index that with the understanding that your index has already been created and been run. So in this case, if I were to run archives, it will automatically rerun indexing. If you haven't run indexing and you process archives or you extract archives like I showed you individually, it will not automatically create the index. You still have to actually then run your index. If you rerun your index, what that will do, which is what is happening here, is the way I did it is when you saw the dialog that popped up, I actually chose to rerun it because I clicked too fast. And what that will do is it will give you the option, says, hey, do you want to delete your index and rerun it? And that's exactly what I'm doing, is I'm rerunning that whole index, which is why it's building this index. I had already had it pre-populated. So now what it's doing is it's building an index off of everything that we can within Bootcamp. So that's why that is running. So with that, I'm going to turn that back over to Ashley for the next stuff, see if there's any questions before we continue, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, we have a couple of questions, Drew. The first question is, does it merge the indexes if you have multiple evidence items processed in the same case?
The indexes are separate, if I'm understanding the questions right. So there is an index built for each one of these. So they're not merged together. It's not one massively large index. We have it. So in this example, there's an index currently being built for Bootcamp. So that would be one index. Then we have an index for Racer that's already built. And so for example, and I didn't show this, if I try to go to, say, this Josh Bobby, and I say, you know what, I don't really care about Racer or Bootcamp. I want to look at a different volume. For example, this other one we'll talking about in a minute, and I start typing, you notice that the notifications window comes up here, and the notifications will tell me that I don't have an indexed for this because I haven't run the actual indexer for that particular volume. So in that case, yeah, you would have to run the indexer in order for the index to actually work on this. So they don't merge as one big large index. The way we isolate it is it's all based on these volumes. And if you wanted to search all of them, you would choose all of them. And so that way it would search as if it was one massive index. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yep, exactly. The next question is, if I bring in an old case, how do I update my index so that I can get these new indexed files or the extracted normalized info?
When you import the case, obviously it's going to go through some schema changes, and you'll see in the evidence status window right here, you'll see the new indexing option. You'll be able to then generate if it's like, say, a case from 2019 R1 and the index had already been run for files, you just do what I was showing you, which actually I'm doing right here. You would just click the rerun button, and it would ask you if you wanted to reset your index, in case you would, and then it would basically rebuild it with the file index as well as all of the normalized data.
Great. I think that covers the questions that we have on indexing and archiving. If you guys think of other questions, please add them to the question window and we'll get to them at the end. But with that, let's move on to Apollo. So Apollo, also known as Apple Pattern of Life Lazy Outputter, was written and is written by Sarah Edwards. We've listed the blog that she has. You can find her link to GitHub for the source code for this. And we worked with Sarah to ask her to be able to integrate into BlackLight some of the information she's been able to extract from SQLite databases that might be stored on iOS or macOS devices. So the way that it will work is you are able to have on our plugins tab, which we're going to show in a minute, the new Apollo queries available to you. So we did update and build in the latest version. I think that she released a week and a half or so ago at the time of this webinar. And you can actually update if she does provide updates from her GitHub source. You can go ahead and update those as new versions become available. We'll also be updating them as she releases new features, but we wanted to make sure folks could actually extract some of the archives that we see from Apollo. So some of those archives are things like our information out of Knowledge C, as well as health data. We have device information, like things that were connected to the device. There are many different artifacts that we can extract from the Knowledge C and Mac side, and then also stuff like screen activity that you will see on the iOS side. So we're going to show you what the integration looks like, and that is going to be the next section. So if you have questions, feel free to type them in. But Drew, I'm going to let you go ahead and demo where they can find the Apollo information.
Okay. All right, so Apollo is a really cool script that Sarah wrote that we've integrated with her permission, and you'll notice on BlackLight we now have these new plugins icon in the command bar, and from there you are able to execute those plugins. Now, plugins is obviously being plural. Right now we currently only support Apollo, so we will make this more extensible in the future. But don't get excited about having a whole bunch of plugins other than Apollo at the moment. But Apollo is actually relatively powerful in of itself, and it just extends BlackLight's capability even further. But that said, so I've clicked on Racer partition, which I happen to know Racer is a macOS partition, and Apollo is specific to data types and databases that exist within macOS as well as iOS. The majority of the files that have the wealth of information that everybody's wanting from these particular scripts, you will not be able to get from a standard iOS backup, or even ingesting an iOS device into BlackLight by itself. You're not going to get to have access to the data for those particular files because Apple locks them down. However, if you have access to, say, a jailbroken device, or you're willing to jailbreak a device, or you have access to, say, GrayKey, you can ingest a GrayKey image of that iOS device and then get all of those files, which is great. Mac doesn't have the same kind of lockdown notion on iOS as they do on macOS, and which is why these scripts will run on macOS as well. So just an example, you click into plugins and automatically you'll notice it starts loading, and here are our Apollo. And as we open this up, it's broken down just as the same way Sarah has her scripts organized, and that's because we're basically just running her SQL scripts. We, as Ashley said, ship Apollo with the latest version. If you go to manage, there's the new plugins option. When you choose plugins, it opens up and you can see this is the version we're doing. If she were to update a new one, you could go to her GitHub site, download that zip, basically remove this one and just drag and drop the new zip in there, or and click the install button and point to the zip, and it will update automatically for you. And so you'll have the latest ones, but this is the latest ones as of a couple weeks ago. So that said, here's our Apollo. A lot of people are very interested in several areas, 3 big areas. I mean, there's a lot of different areas, but the 3 big areas that people really focus in on are the knowledge C database, as well as the location data usage, and then any of the health data. Well, you can see on this particular Mac, our Josh guy was not very healthy. There is no health data, and so there's really no point showing you anything there. However, there is some knowledge data here, and so you can actually see there's, some of the bigger ones, and any of those are familiar with Sarah's scripts, or with some iOS and Mac internals will understand that this knowledge C is a single database. If I click on it, you'll see in the path over here, if I come here down here to Safari, you'll notice, let's get my dock out of the way. Yeah, Apple docs are a real pain. It will show you on the path here, it's a knowledge C database, right? And so within that, you have app activity. There's going to be in focus, there's intents. Those are all, you may not understand what those are, but there's some pretty good artifacts behind in that. So activity is basically, what is the app doing on your system, whether that's iOS or Mac OS, what's happening on the particular device within that specific application. When you look at app intents, it gives you the context to that particular app activity. And then in focus kind of is really awesome for an iOS device, because it shows you what particular application was used at that time. So as we'll talk about in a couple of slides in a minute, when you're talking about things like distracted driving, if you were to have access to this, you could literally see, hey, user was using messages at the time of the accident. And so that kind of stuff is extremely powerful. Not much within this racer partition, but you can see the in focus. So this is going to show you all of the applications with date timestamps of basically that app when it was used. So how many times and how often that particular app was used by a user. So that can be pretty powerful. A lot of stuff in here. There's a lot of information that BlackLight already had and is duplicative. That's okay. So for example, SMS, Safari, we already parse all of that within here. But this just gives you more recourse to actually prove, hey, there's two independent sources. There's the Apollo scripts, and then there's BlackLight, and they marry up, and you can see that you can actually compare your data, compare and contrast it that way. So a lot of cool stuff. So this is from Racer. Let's look at the a different one. So I've actually imported Tanisha's phone here, which this is a gray key image. And you can see right now it's dynamically loading those Apollo scripts. I have 104,000 hits on this particular one, so you get a lot more. So you notice right off the bat, we got 27,000 SMS messages. That's not a lot. I used to think it is, but any of you that have kids know that that probably is what they'll do in an hour. And so I feel sorry for all you investigators out there who have to investigate this kind of stuff, because it's just way too much. Anyway, so knowledge C, you can look on here. We can look at the first thing is if we look at the in focus. These are applications that were in used at these particular date times. So you can actually see there's SMS going on. Someone was looking at the preferences. Someone actually took a screenshot. An app called Mobile Slideshow. A lot of cool stuff in there. When we look at the activity, we can break those down a little bit more narrowly. Mobile mail, so someone was actually doing mail. And then you can look at a lot of the other stuff. So for example, how often was the device charged? What was the battery level at a specific time? Did somebody plug it in? So you can actually see all of that. So if you haven't seen the Apollo scripts, you go through here, that's what all of this stuff is showing you. So when was again, like I just said, when was the device plugged in? What was the device battery level at a specific time? What was the orientation of the device when it was being used, right? So if you can correlate this with, say, when the camera was in use, up here through app activity and through in focus, say they were taking pictures, you can then, and you can find those images on the phone, and you can correlate, hey, Apple says that the orientation was done in a portrait mode, and you can actually confirm that here. If they deleted the photo, you don't have that, but later on you find it and you don't have the metadata because it's scrubbed for whatever reason, and you have this, it just helps you pin all of those pieces together. And then there's also location data. Obviously, Apple got in trouble a long time ago about storing this stuff. It used to be very easy to get, and then they put it into protected mode. And even now, while you can still get it through jailbroken devices or through mechanisms like Gray Key, the data is there. However, it's sometimes it's fairly sparse as to if it gets overwritten or not. And so it really is kind of luck of the draw is when you actually grab that phone and actually make the image and what's in it. But all this stuff is there, so you can click on all of it and see the data. It's a wealth of information. It works the same way in the BlackLight as all these other views. So if there's something of interest to you, you can highlight it, you can see the data, and you can tag this plugin just like you can anything else. This is the raw view for which we retrieve the data. If you actually wanted to see the database itself, you could go to preview. In this case, it's going to open up the Knowledge C database, and here's all of the tables, and you could do your own queries if you're so inclined. So pretty powerful system. And again, we'll be extending this out to future versions of not just Apollo, but other plugins that we will make available to all of you. So back to you, Ashley.
All right, so I wanted to move on to Berla, as I know that kind of connects a little bit with some of the things you highlighted with Knowledge C. So our Berla integration was announced along with our BlackLight 2019 R2 release, and we're very excited to expand our relationship with Berla. They have so much information from vehicle forensic data that can help when combined with the rest of the data you might have. So you mentioned being on their phone during an accident, maybe distracted driver type situation. By combining that phone data with Berla's vehicle forensic information, you can really get a more holistic picture of what's going on. So a vehicle system, if you've connected a device to it, whether USB, Bluetooth, it might have some of the data available, even Wi-Fi, stored on the vehicle itself. So with Berla IV version 2.4.1 and higher, you can now take all of that data, extract it into a database that is now able to be ingested into BlackLight. So potential data you might find here are things like device contacts, call logs, SMS messages, any of the data that we can pull out, including routing information, are things that we can now integrate in with your whole BlackLight case. And we really want to focus on BlackLight and being able to connect to all these different sources that you guys need to be able to make the data as rich as possible, so you don't have to pass data back and forth between products. You can either directly see them together or as close as possible get the data in the tool that you're going to be doing most of the review in. So that is a little bit about why and how we did our Berla integration. But Drew, let's go ahead and show a demo.
Sure. So yeah, Berla is pretty cool software. For those of you in law enforcement who have seen it, you'll understand what I'm talking about. I'm just going to show you this real quick. This happens to be Berla. It's a Windows application. This is only part of the whole Berla package. I mean, obviously you need to be able to have access to the vehicle and plug into the vehicle's ECUs, the computer systems of the vehicles, which in some cases means you need to remove the dash to get behind it and whatever. But they have this fantastic piece of software which you can acquire data from a wealth of different vehicles. And the first time I saw it, I was quite shocked at how much data exists within some of those vehicles. It's really fantastic from an investigative standpoint. But this is Berla, what Ashley was just talking about. So assuming you've ingested from Berla within the Berla case ecosystem, you basically through IV is the name of their software, you can go to tools and you can export. And there's now a new option called BlackBag. So you export this to BlackBag and you then drop that file right into BlackLight. And so that's kind of what I've done here, as I've taken this IVX file and I've imported it straight into BlackLight. And so when you do that, I'll just give you an idea of what it looks like. I just take this IVX file, I drag and drop it into BlackLight. BlackLight's going to spin for a second, and it's going to look for, it's going to basically identify, it's got to do its magic behind the scenes, and you'll notice it has the Berla logo on it, and I have all of my options, just like I do with any other evidence that I'm ingesting. I'm not going to ingest this one just yet, but because I've already ingested this Berla particular vehicle, and you'll see when you go to the browser view, it's not a file tree because this is an actual database. You can click on the file and go into preview, and you'll see the data there. So that would be one way for you to actually see all of the data that's within the database. But what we have done is we've parsed all of the commonality information that's within these particular Berla databases, and we can now show you. So if I go to communications and I go to the calls log, I'm not going to show you all the phone numbers, but the service is known as, we just refer to it as Berla. These are going to all incoming and outgoing calls that were logged by the vehicle. So a lot of times, obviously, unless the car is a real nice car that actually has, an OnStar type system or other systems with built-in Wi-Fi where you can do it without your device, most of people are going to utilize either an Android or an iPhone, or who knows what others they might be using. But either way, that communication is logged obviously in two locations, the vehicle and the mobile device, which is the example in here. And so this is the information that's coming from the vehicle itself. So you can now, if you have this particular phone, or phones, plural, because it is going to be multiple different devices potentially that's connected to the vehicle, you would be able to then correlate those data, that data, and say, without a doubt, it was this device that was used. So there's call logs, there's also contacts, so you'll be able to see those particular individual contacts within the vehicle, which is great. But also there is location data, and there's a wealth of location data within the Berla ecosystem. So for example, here we can see that the ECU is powered on. Where was that powered on at? Well, you can see it here, it was in Kansas City. And you can export all of this data to either using it in BlackLight if you wanted to do that, or export it to a KMZ through up in Google Earth and actually get tracking. And have all of that information, all at the tip of your fingers. It's actually really pretty good. This is all the location data. You can correlate that further with the system logs. So when you go into system logs, we now have a Berla option, and this is everything that was dumped out of the database. So this is going to tell you things that not necessarily have location database, but it's going to tell you when the car started, right? Was hard braking applied? Was the driver door window opened? Was the passenger door locked? Anything like that. Here, was the car shifted into neutral? Was it in drive? Was it put into manual? Whatever you're going to do, depending on the car, right? This is all highly dependent on what the ECU stores, not necessarily what Berla is giving you. It's all what's stored in the vehicle, but you can get all that. And so now you have the ability to take all of this stuff and correlate it through other means. So if you had any of the phone devices that were in touch with this particular phone, within this particular car, you'd be able to actually put those two together and actually build yourself a great picture. And then assuming you had it and did it in gray key, so for example, if I had Tanisha's phone connected to this particular Ford Explorer, I would be able to dump all of that stuff and build a really good picture to say, hey, Tanisha was a really distracted driver. It works rather well. So very excited about our Berla integration.
Thanks, Drew. We're going to move on to our next couple of integrations, so we can make sure to get through kind of all of our topics and gather some questions at the end. We announced earlier this year our partnership with Image Analyzer, and we've embedded and provided for you guys in our product the ability to categorize pictures and media for different threat categories. And so the ones on the right were ones that we had added originally, and we've expanded the identification of images and pictures and videos to include new categories which are relevant for a lot of different type of use cases. I want to touch for a second on our child sexual abuse material category that was developed. That category has already gone out to agencies and we've had really good feedback about how that works. We also have a whole separate webinar about investigating child exploitation cases that is available separately, and that webinar also covers our released integration with Semantics 21. So if you're someone who focuses on child exploitation, prosecution, and investigations, please check out that specific webinar as it goes into more depth about how those work and how we can work with Semantic 21 for a direct integration with their product to be doing image review. But for all investigators, there's a few new categories that we've added around things that you might commonly see images of. So if they've taken a picture of a document, that could be a contract, it could be any sort of just, hey, this is a picture that has a spreadsheet or anything else, we're now able to identify those items as documents that are contained in pictures. We also are looking for things like currency, credit cards, identification could be things like driver's license, and then the last new category is gambling. And to Drew's point, by sorting by these categories, you get a better sense of the person themselves. So if there's a specific incident that happens, maybe an extreme incident, you can look for on their computer how many images do they have of weapons, or how many images do they have around these particular types of categories, so you can get a sense of the scale of their interest in these particular types. So with that, let's go ahead and hand this back over to Drew to show us how the new threat categorization works.
That's probably a good thing we don't do my computer, because there'd be a lot of Texas things in there. But it works really well. So those of you who have used the threat category, you'll notice, again, this is all done during ingestion, or you can do it after the fact. So it's all done under our pictures. So you'll notice here, we have a green check mark, which basically means we have done all of the image categorization. So all options, you can't do any other options. Here, we haven't run any, so we could if we wanted to. On here, we have it on, it says classify. So if I were to click on that, it's going to open up a window which tells me, let me move it over so you can see it. These are the new threat categories, which Ashley just identified. There's the original 8, and then obviously the new ones. So you can pick and choose now. Before it wasn't an option. It was like you either run Image Analyzer or you do not. Now you can choose which threat category you want to run. So which will actually, could end up speeding up depending on what you've chosen. And again, you can isolate it. So you may actually have a case where you are not allowed to look at certain items, right? Your warrant doesn't, exclude you from certain things. So now you have the ability to say, hey, okay, I can only look for ID, credit card info. Great, you check that, you hit okay, it does its magic behind the scenes, and you move on. I'm just going to focus on Racer because that's the one I've already done, because this can take a little bit of time to run. Remember, it's going through a lot of things. There's a lot of algorithms that it's run through each image, but it is, once it's done, it is pretty amazing. So when we go to the media view, obviously this is our typical view here. We have the ability now where we can sort on all of them. So those of you who are familiar, the original 8 were there. We added the new ones. So just as a quick example, we'll do alcohol. It's going to go through all of those images, and it's got to actually pull the data from the database. And you can see, there is a lot of alcohol here. I click on this. If I were to go to metadata, or even bring up this metadata window, either way, you'll notice that we have our values. Alcohol is 99.5%. So I would agree that if you were to look at this image, it's alcohol. And so you can do that for all of these. So just as a simple example, one of the new ones, currency. If I wanted to see, hey, is this guy actually making currency? There's a lot of guys that are that do that. They're dealing with credit cards. They're trying to do whatever they can. So you can see in currency, there's a credit card example. Looks like a blank. Click on this. It's Ben. And so we have, it works rather well. The other thing you can do is you don't have to sort on here. You can file filter for those particular things. It works actually just as well here in the view filter. You click on this and you choose which category you want, and this will isolate it. So if you say, hey, I only want to see images that have, say, currency at a value of greater than 50%, you can do that. And then you can then even sort further on that, because you may actually have multiple images. And again, just, we have another webinar which we discussed that, but if you have a particular image that's at 100%, all the other categories are not going to show you anything, because it's 100% of one particular category. So you may want to isolate that by saying, hey, here's all these images, but also then resort it based on others. So it works really well. And again, you can do that one of two ways: upon initial evidence ingestion or running your classification. Back to you, Ashley.
Thanks, Drew. Switching gears, the last category that I wanted to talk about are things that were specific feedback from customers and potential customers of things they wanted to see to make BlackLight even better. So we're going to cover a few of these in more detail, but the first is around how we export files out of BlackLight. We had added the ability to export to the logical evidence file format, and case LO1 is another way that folks add that back in BlackLight 2019 R1, and we've done additional improvements to the speed of that in this version, as well as when you're just exporting regular files to the disk, whether you're going to ingest them somewhere else or exporting them for ingestion for additional processing. All of those have done improvements based on what we have heard from our customers. We also heard you'd like us to speed up working with PhotoDNA, so we worked on that piece. And then we were able to work with particular customers to add new file types and new file carving signatures so that we can improve how we did that. And include for the Apple photos, making sure that those were shown in our graphics file filter. So really quickly, if you go to the next slide, I just wanted to specifically call out the folks who did provide feedback that made BlackLight 2019 R2 better. And this is not a comprehensive list, but these were folks who really worked with us to identify things that we could make better and give us suggestions that made it into BlackLight 2019 R2. So Drew, if you want to click over to the product, we can show some of those user feedback improvements.
Sure. And I'll just reiterate what Ashley said. I want to personally thank everybody who's taken the time and effort to provide us feedback. It's not easy when obviously there's no such thing as perfect software, and everybody strives for that. But we absolutely crave the feedback, good, bad, or indifferent, from all of you, because it only makes our product that much better. So that said, yeah, there's quite a few of under the hood type improvements we've done. The big one I'll focus on, these aren't the big sexy things like, image categorization with threats, but there are a couple of really cool features. Sometimes performance is what people really want, and we've strived on this release to really fix and clean up some exporting things. So I just moved a folder over to my desktop, and you can see there, I actually will delete this. There's nothing in there anyway. I have a blank folder called export, and I'm going to show you, I'm going to export a couple of things and show you what we've done. So obviously I'm on a Mac, and we run on both Mac and Windows. And if you were to go to preferences and within BlackLight, there are a couple of export options. There are a couple of new ones with this release, and it's important to highlight the changes there so you guys understand the differences. Number one, with our LO1, we now have the ability to segment the LO1. So you're not going to have, a massive LO1. If you needed to break that up into smaller segments, you now have the ability to do that. The other thing is we took out the ability, if you remember in previous versions, we had it where you had to, hey, preserve the path. We took that out because we felt that people weren't necessarily noticing that. And the biggest issue you have is if you're on a Mac and you export and you want to then take that to a Windows machine. There is an issue because Mac doesn't care. You can make your path as pretty much as long as you want. You bring that over to Windows, and Windows doesn't like it, and you'll lose data. So we put that more in your face as opposed to being hidden within a preferences view. And so I'm going to show you what that looks like. But while I'm in here, the other thing is one of the big things that came up, and it was kind of interesting how it came up, but if we don't, BlackLight itself does not categorize images. So those of you who are involved in using Project Vic or others around the world who are in child exploitation type cases, you use a lot of different software. Ashley mentioned S21, which we've integrated, and we have a great partnership with them. All these images need to be categorized. So either an image is uncategorized, meaning it hasn't been looked at or categorized as, hey, it doesn't matter, or there's a set of categories. And for those of you who aren't aware, there's a lot of different categories. And unfortunately, to make our job that much harder is, it's kind of like electricity and the way we drive on the roads. Go to a different country and it's different. And so this is no exception. So previous versions of BlackLight, we automatically said, hey, if the image is not categorized because it hasn't gone through S21 or it hasn't gone through GRIF-I and brought back in and categorized those images somehow, we automatically exported all uncategorized images as category level 5, which is great if you're in the United States, but if you're in England or anywhere that uses England style, category 5 is extreme pornography. And that could be problematic when you're exporting images and giving it to somebody, and all of a sudden all they see is extreme pornography, and it's just images of a car or a cat or whatever. So we listened. It's this very good thing, and we now fixed it so you can choose. And I understand that they have now changed it yet again, so we'll be addressing that as well. But you can choose what you want your default categorization to be for a file export now. Okay, so that long diatribe aside, I'm going to export some files. So if I go to the Racer partition, and you can do this from any of the views, it doesn't matter. I'm going to go into users, and then we'll go into Josh, and you'll notice that Josh has got typical user hierarchy here. If we take a look at, say, his downloads, actually I want to do his downloads. We got a short version here. We'll just do I don't want documents either. Let's look at Google Drive. This is a perfect example. So I want to export all of these because I want to use it for whatever reason. So if I actually just tag the folder and I go here and I export, you're going to see a bunch of new export options. So if I go to export selected files, the selected file happens to be a folder in this case, you'll see I have 3 new options. So there's files only, there's the folder structure, and then the folder structure from root. So I can show you all 3, but I'll explain it real quickly. So files only, you're only going to get these particular files that are in this Google Drive folder. Now you can choose what folder you put those into, but you're going to get those files. You're also going to get a prepended folder, and that's going to be true for all of them, and I'll explain what that is in a second. Also, folder structure. So if I did folder structure, you're going to get Google Drive and all of the files. And if I do folder structure from root, well, in that case, it's going to go Racer, users, Josh, Google Drive, and all of the files. So let me show you that real quick. We're going to go ahead and just do from root, and I'm going to choose where I'm going to extract that to. So this dialog came up. We're just going to go to the desktop. I'm going to put it under export, and we're going to export it. And just like that, you'll see it's done. So if I open up my export folder now, you'll see, and this is what I was talking about, I said I would show you earlier. You notice we prepend this folder called Racer because typically in previous versions of BlackLight, when you exported that, it would have come from users, Josh, Google, because that's actually where it exists on disk. We're now actually showing you the volume that it came from, which is Racer, and in this case, we prepend the number 2 because that's the volume that BlackLight identified it as. So now you, as the user, can specifically say, especially if there's duplicates or they came from different volumes, where that came from. So remember, I chose from root, so here's our root. It's Racer's volume, users, Josh, Google Drive, and then all of our files. And you notice it was relatively fast. We went through some pains to dramatically speed up our export, and our whole export framework was completely redone. So if I were to just choose the folder structure, all you would see in that case would be just this Google Drive. The other thing we can do is, as Ashley mentioned, and as I just showed you within your preferences, well, I'm not going to change those, but we're going to export this as an LO1. I'll just keep it in export, set your name, we'll save it, and we should get a file here called files. It's already done. I can just bring this back right into BlackLight and ingest your LO1. Now this LO1 is obviously readable by other forensics tools. It doesn't matter what they are. It's a typical LO1. You can bring it in. So I'll just bring it in. You can see there's our LO1 file. I can easily browse it. There it is, right here. And there's all of our files. So that's those are the two big things about exporting in our LO1. There are several other things we did. So for example, our photo DNA, when you do that now, we have done a 4x improvement on the speed for that. It was dramatically sped up. So that's, I think people are going to like that. And then really no need to actually go through the pains of archiving, carving anything out, but I can show you, it was actually a good point. Somehow we had missed this, and so really appreciate folks finding it. But when you chose carving, we were missing, and there are other file types we're probably still missing, but there's some pretty common file types, especially with movies. So MKV files, very, very common. And so we didn't have that in our carving signature. We added that along with the software flash or Shockwave flash. And so now you can actually carve those. So, in this example, if there are things that you feel we're missing and that you don't want to add it yourself, by all means, send it to us and we will totally add that. And then the last one that I was going to show is within the media view, and I don't believe that Racer has any, but Tanisha's phone hopefully will. Oh, and I didn't parse pictures. One of the things within the filtering view is we can actually filter by HEIC types. So had I actually processed Tanisha's pictures, you would see I could actually filter only on the HEIC types. So that's going to be true in file filter as well as in the media view. So those are a couple of the issues. I mean, there was a lot. There's a lot of, like I said, internal behind the scenes things that we did to tweak various areas, but a lot of this really comes from you, our customers. So again, appreciate that. I'll turn it back to you, Ashley.
Thanks, Drew. I have a couple questions and then we'll go to our last slide. So the first question is, do all the enhancements that we showed today and including Apollo work when you run BlackLight on Windows and Mac? I know we were showing it on a Mac, but do they all work the same across?
Yes. So just let me be 100% clear, is BlackLight is 100% cross-platform. So it works equally as well on, and when I say equally as well, I mean as far as the processing capability and what you're going to get out of it on Mac as well as Windows. So everything I showed today will work on Windows or Mac, doesn't matter.
All right, and then another question that we had is when they're exporting logical evidence files, LO1s, from two different evidence files, is there a way to identify which evidence file they came from?
When they're exporting from two different logical files, well, yeah, so in this case, when you see I imported this LO1 file and it automatically got assigned a volume number. This is an internal BlackLight numbering mechanism. In this case, it's 14. So if you brought in another LO1, the next one I bring in is going to be 15. So when you export, just like I did here, you're going to see, it will say, so this could also be called files LO1 and it's a different one. That's why one of the reasons we did this. So when you now export from both of them, you'll see, in this case, this number would be 14, the next one would be 15, and it would be whatever your path is for your export. Does that answer the question?
Sorry, was on mute. Yeah, so the difference there was just that it's coming from two different evidence files, not into two different LO1s. So I think one note of clarification is we don't append to an existing LO1 additional files. So if you had a first set of files and then you wanted to add more to it, we don't merge them into the same version of logical evidence files. I believe that's still correct, right, Drew?
That's still correct. Yeah, we basically, we don't merge them. It's still different files.
Yep. All right, so I know we're a little over time, and I'm sorry I couldn't get to all the questions today. We will be looking at those afterwards if your question hasn't already been answered. But thank you, Drew, for walking us through how to use all the latest features. As a reminder, we'll be sending out the recording of this webinar to everyone as well, so stay tuned for that. And if you're interested in learning more about any of our products and services, please email sales@blackbagtech.com. And please be sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn at BlackBagTech. And you can also subscribe to our blog to get our latest updates. Thank you all so much again for joining, and have a great rest of your day.